Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
I've been telling you that I want to do an episode of Lebanon, a fascinating country. And I started doing that. The problem is, the more you read up, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, how ignorant you are. So while I was reading up on this, I must confess to you, and that's a loaded term right now, I must confess to you that I had never figured out that there was a political system called confessionalism. When I said I must confess to you, that's the reason I said it's a loaded term. So what is confessionalism, and why do we read about confessionalism when we try and understand the little country called Lebanon? Lebanon is a tiny country. Lebanon is a country about 10,400 square kilometers, which is almost exactly to the last decimal point, nearly to the size of our Tripura state, and has at this point has just over 50 lakh people, very talented people with very high social indicators, but a really wrecked economy. Lebanon has followed a system called the confessional system. I will try and explain to you. It's not as if everybody is lining up to make a confession about something, but confessionalism is something that comes out of the Turkish Ottoman tradition. In the Turkish Ottoman tradition, where nationalism was not so well developed as yet, nationalism was not so well developed, even ethnicity was not so well developed, but religion was. Sectarianism comes before everything else. So a concept developed that people were linked together by similar religious beliefs. So you can be, for example, you can be a Muslim, but then you can have several variants there. But if there is sufficient similarity or sufficient uniformity among those faiths or those beliefs, then you could be ranked together, you could be grouped together, because you were then considered to be the people of the same confessional community. These confessional communities then made a unit. So in a way, this is a de jure, this is a legal way of mixing religion and politics. Now this is exactly contrary, say, to the constitution of most modern countries, which say don't mix religion with politics. So India is now stated to be a secular country. Many other countries may not call themselves secular, but most democratic countries, modern democratic countries, follow the policy of keeping religion out of politics. Whereas a confessional system or a confessional constitution, as is the case in Lebanon, by law and by constitution mixes religion with politics. That is what makes Lebanon stand apart from many of the other democracies. In fact, it must be one of the rare ones that we have seen, probably the only one, definitely the only one that I have seen and examined so far. I know that in 2003, in Iraq at one point, some similar system was set up between various sects and communities to bring about some kind of power sharing and stability at that point. But later, a more proper democracy came, and then majorities and the rest happened. But Lebanon in 1943, when the French mandate ended, the French got a mandate for Lebanon in 1923, after the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire was divided. A lot of the problems that we see in the Middle East right now came up after the Ottoman Empire declined. Now that is not to say that when Ottoman Empire was there was perfect peace and harmony and happiness, because many of these regions were colonized, they were part of the Ottoman Empire, right? And no colonial power is a nice guy, right? You're a colony, you are a colony. So 1923, many of these Middle Eastern regions, as the allies of that war won the war, they carved up this region amongst themselves. So the authority or the power they got over the regions, that was called mandate. So the French got the mandate over Lebanon. 1943, the French mandate ended and Lebanon came up as a more distinct country. Now this was a very diverse country. This was a country which had a dominant Christian population but not majority. The larger numbers were still Muslims, but Christians were dominant, and among Muslims also there were Shias and Sunnis. I will in a couple of minutes give you the current population division because that's very important. But the fact is that 1943, when they were trying to create this new nationalism and this new nation, they decided that to keep it together, they will follow the system of confessionalism. What that means is that each community in this case will have power according to their own numbers. This gets very complicated as we go ahead. Now this division was cut very fine. What this division said was that Christians, most of the Christians, the largest section of Christians in Lebanon are Maronite Christians. About 52% of all Christians in Lebanon are Maronite Christians. About 30%, 32% of Lebanon's population is now Christian, might have been more in 1943 because Muslim numbers have gone up since. That's a different story. But of the 32% or so Christians, more than 52% are Maronite Christians. Who are the Maronite Christians? I don't know that much about orders in Christianity, but all I can tell you is, and the detail there is out of my syllabus, all I can tell you is that Maronite Christians are a branch of Catholics. They follow the Syriac tradition and use the Syriac language above Latin. Also, the tradition they come from, the Syriac tradition, has similarities with, say, Syrian Christians with our Kerala. Although, mind you, our Syrian Christians in Kerala do their service in Malayalam. Now, these Maronite Christians, although they are Catholics, they are also different from traditional Catholics or our traditional understanding of Catholics. Let me not even say traditional Catholics because I don't know who's traditional and who's not. But I'm only talking of our understanding. For Maronites, for example, their priests can marry and their monks and nuns live in the same place. They can live in the same place co-ed. So there are differences. So Maronite Christians were given the pride of place in the system whereby they would always have the president. They would always have the president. The Sunnis, the Sunni Muslims will have the prime minister, and powers were divided between the president and the prime minister. So Maronite Christians, the president, Sunnis, the prime minister, then what will the Shias get? So Shias got the speaker of the house, and what about the other orders, right? Then deputy prime minister and deputy speaker were both given to Eastern Orthodox Christians. So that was the system that Lebanon began with, and that's the system which principally still exists also, although there have been changes which I will tell you. Now, what does it sound like? And I know that at this point when I say this will sound very, very provocative, if not risque. Which is that, doesn't it sound like the demand that we've seen lately in India, jiski jitni abadi, uska utna haq, right? Lebanon, in fact, I'm not saying that what happened in Lebanon is an example for India, but what happened in Lebanon is a case study which cannot be missed, because Lebanon right now is a broken country. It's a country where population has come down, inflation has been running at 171% in 2022. Its currency has been declining rapidly. Its debt to GDP ratio is among the highest in the world. In fact, if you look at major countries, then it is the third highest in the world. Its talent has been leaving the country. Large parts of the country are controlled by warlords and militias. We know that all of southern Lebanon is controlled by the Hezbollah militias. And Hezbollah, by the way, is a regular party in Lebanon, which has members in the national parliament. In fact, in the 128-member parliament, Hezbollah has 13 members and also has had ministerial positions. 13 members is a lot because almost no single party has members reaching the 20-member mark. So it is that broken a country. It is that broken a country which is now caught between several proxy wars. Israelis and the Syrians are fighting each other there. The Saudis and the Iranians are fighting each other there. There's a Syrian-Iranian axis which controls large parts of Lebanon. There is a Saudi-US axis that controls another large part of Lebanon, and you can see who might be linked with whom. So you will know that if Hezbollah is a Shia organization, Hezbollah will be closely linked with the Syrian-Iranian axis. Again, the Christian groups will be closer to the Western axis. And then where do the Sunnis go? So Sunnis, a lot of them very close to the Palestinians. They don't like the Israelis. They don't like the Israelis, but they don't like Shias either. So that is where the Saudis also come in. So Lebanon now is a broken country, so broken that since last year, since the winter of last year, they haven't even had a president. Their last president went out, Michel Aoun, who was a former army general. He was an elected president. He went out. Since then, the country has not been able to elect a president. Not just that, the country also has a caretaker prime minister. It is a completely broken country. I don't know how else do you define a failed state. Maybe it does not pass still some final parameter of being called a failed state. But in my book, if you want to see a failed state, this is an example. And one of the reasons this has happened is that the country, as it was founded, embraced sectarianism, embraced constitutionally the idea of mixing religion with politics, and also constitutionally embraced the idea of dividing power based on each one's sectarian identity. Now, what is sectarian can be caste, as in the case of India. So when you say jitni jiski abadi utna uska hak, you have to be careful. Of course, in India we have overarching identities. There is Hinduism, there is Islam, there is Sikhism, there is Christianity. These are overarching religious identities. Also, Indian nationalism is much better developed than, say, Lebanon at any point of time. Also in Lebanon in 1943 also, this was an effort at creating a nation by dividing up power. In India already that issue is settled. There is a strong Indian nationalism. So we don't have to overinterpret the Lebanese situation and become paranoid. But there is an example that we must look at because this cascaded down. I told you the positions of President, Prime Minister, Speaker of the House, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Speaker, these were all divided on sectarian basis. Not just that. After that, even seats in parliament were divided. Now, you might say they were divided according to the population, but it wasn't that clear. It wasn't that clear simply because Christians were the dominant population. So they punched above their weight in the distribution of powers otherwise, in distribution of spoil. So almost everything, government jobs, government positions, everything was divided on the same basis. Jitni jiski abadi, utna uska hak. Now you see how this is divided. If you see Christians are about 32% right now. Again, they are divided among many different kinds of Christians. I will tell you that. 21% of the overall population are Maronites. I told you they are more than half of all Christian population. So one in 5 of all Lebanese is a Maronite Christian. 8% are Greek Orthodox. 5% are Melkite, 1% Protestant, and another 6% are non-native to Lebanon Christians. If you add them all up, it comes to about 30%. Now these numbers can be very dodgy because these numbers have been changing. Over the decades, we've seen the flight of a lot of talent from Lebanon and flight of a lot of the Christian community from Lebanon. This at the same time, because everything is proportionate, people from other sects and religion have tried to increase their numbers. So there's been a race to produce more babies wherever you can ensure that, because after all a family has to agree to produce babies, and do families produce babies towards a political end? I don't know, but their leaders and politicians can promote that idea, and some people do buy into it. But also there are soft borders, there are soft unprotected borders. So Shias can bring in more Shias from the Syrian side. Sunnis can bring in more Sunnis from the Israeli side or the Palestinian side. So that's how demographic balance has also been changing for a long time. If you look at the Muslims, so Muslims, the overall Muslim population can be anything between say 60% to 67% depending on how you count. And I will explain to you in a minute why I said how you count. So overall Muslims, let's say about 31% are Sunni and about 31% are Shia. That's why there is division between them also. One gets the Prime Minister, one gets the Speaker, right? And then similarly there is a division in Parliament also. I will come to that. Then among the Shias, there is also a 6% group of Alawites. Now Alawites also is a sect of Shias. We explained to you that they are a small group, but that group is represented in this region by the ruling dynasty or by the ruling dictatorial dynasty of Syria. So Assads are Alawites. So 6% are Alawites. So this is the Muslims. I said give or take 5%. So you can say 62 or 67. That's because there is also a 5% population of the Druze community. Now who are the Druze? The Druze by and large define themselves as monotheistic people. And over time, because they were always a minority, if they were in a Christian village, they followed the Christian method of praying. If they were in a Muslim village, they followed the Muslim method of praying. Over time, however, they are increasingly counted as Muslims, although among devout Muslims and among conservative Muslims, they are victimized because they are seen like Ismailis, like a sect, because they don't follow all of the principles of traditional Islam. So that's 5%. You can count them as Muslims, you may not count them as Muslims. That's why I said the Muslim numbers are give or take 5%. Now how does it work? How does it work in national parliament? So this division, the first division of the spoils or of the power base in Lebanon came up after what was called the National Pact in 1943 that established the modern state of Lebanon. Now that carried on. By mid-1950s, trouble had already started because Britain and France had already started playing games. There was conflict over Suez Canal. Lebanese leadership did not condemn it, and because it did not condemn it, a lot of the Muslim groups got upset, and after that, in stages, civil war started. So between I would say mid-60s, between mid-1960s to 1975, there was instability. From 1975 to 1990, a proper 15-year civil war took place in Lebanon. When that civil war ended, in that civil war, everybody participated. Everybody means the big powers got involved, particularly the US, Iran got involved, Saudi Arabia got involved, Israel got involved. It was within that period, in fact, that in 1982, Israel also carried out an invasion of Lebanon because they were so hassled by what was happening in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah. And in fact, the Israeli armed forces reached close to Beirut, and parts of Beirut were shelled by Israeli artillery as well. At the end of this, there was a bunch of peace accords signed between the various warring communities. These were the same warring communities which Lebanon's confessional system of division of powers based on their population strength was supposed to prevent fighting each other. That system was supposed to bring them together and create a nationalism. It completely failed to do so. So these agreements were called Taif agreements. Taif is a place, as we know, in Saudi Arabia. That's where these agreements were signed. And these agreements, among the many changes that the various factions demanded and which were then accepted by them in these agreements, also resulted in some change in the composition of national parliament, because after all, Muslim groups in particular wanted more seats in national parliament. So I will tell you, and you will see a chart on your screen, so what was the situation before and what is the situation after Taif Accords. So before Taif Accords, the parliament size of the parliament was 99. Of this, Christians of various denominations had 54. So Christians had a clear majority also, although they are not majority population. That is how this was ordained or decided in 1943. Now the size of parliament as a result of Taif Accords, size of parliament was increased from 99 to 128, of which Christian groups had 64 and Muslim groups had 64. So this became equal. Earlier it was 54 Christians, 45 Muslims. Now it became 64 Christians, 64 Muslims. So you got a dead heat, equal division of power. How has it worked for Lebanon since then? For long periods, Lebanon hasn't had a government. At this point, Lebanon effectively does not have a government, does not have a president. Prime Minister is a caretaker. For several years in the middle, Lebanon has missed an election. For several years in the middle, Lebanon has missed having a president. Lebanon has had a prime minister assassinated. That was Rafiq Hariri. Later, his son Saad Hariri became prime minister. He was removed. He was also sort of held in Saudi Arabia. It was widely believed in 2017 that he was detained in Saudi Arabia, but he then resigned. That led to more instability. So these accords and this kind of perfect division of power and political spoils has also not led to any unity. And you want to see how this parliament seats are divided? Once again, I'm not saying that all parallels apply, but see also if you really started applying the principle of caste-based everything in our country, caste-based, religion-based, anything, caste-based, religion-based, tribe-based, ethnicity-based, anything. The division in Lebanon is Maronite Catholics, they had 30 before Taif Accords in the House of 99, now they have 34. I will just tell you the numbers they have now, because my idea is to tell you how this division is carried out. So today in a house of 128, Christians have 64, that's half, of which Maronite Christians have 34, Eastern Orthodox have 14, Melkite Christians have 8, Armenian Orthodox Christians have 5, Armenian Catholic Christians have 1, Protestants have 1, and other Christian minorities have 1. That's add up to 64 of the Christian bloc. Then come to Muslims. Sunnis have 27, Shias have 27. Perfect world, right? Except it doesn't work like that in real life. Sunnis have 27, Shias have 27, Alawites have 2, and the Druze have 8. So that also adds up to 64. So this is a very interesting example. I know that no other country has done it. I know that history tells us, and this is a history now of 80 years, exactly 80 years since this national pact came into being in 1943. The history of 80 years tells you that this proportionate division of political power, spoils, jobs, responsibilities, economic resources, etc. does not work. Once again, the one reason it does not work, it did not work in Lebanon, is that before this happened, before the National Pact and the creation of the new state in 1943, there wasn't really an established Lebanese nationalism. So in place of nationalism, all you got were these confessional communities, as if going back to Ottoman times. But Ottoman times, there was an emperor on top of all of you, and if anybody misbehaved, consequences were quite terrible. Don't import this disaster directly into the Indian situation, saying that, oh, now that you have a caste census and people are demanding proportionate distribution of spoils, jobs, admissions, etc., we'll end up this way. Because India has, as I told you, many overarching identities. There are religions across the country, there is a secular constitution, there is also a very strong Indian nationalism, So under no way is the Indian situation comparable to Lebanon's at any point of time, because India begins with a strong nationalism, not today, not 100 years back, not 200 years back, but for a very, very long time, times immemorial. We have to keep that reality in our minds before we start getting neurotic about this. But the fact at the same time is that the idea of just counting the people, dividing them, in this case based on religion and sect, tomorrow it can be caste, day after it can be ethnicity, tribes, regions, linguistic groups, whatever. The idea of dividing people like that and distributing spoils accordingly, according to their numbers, and I know it's a tricky thing to say these days, this takes away competition among people from various communities, because that's how merit emerges. So it's not to say people of a certain caste have more merit and certain castes have less merit, no, but people of all castes and all ethnicities, all religions, all linguistic groups must compete fairly. At the same time, do you need to know who's who if there are deep injustices running in your society, yes, you need to know who's who, and you need to know who's been left behind and who suffered discrimination and who needs now a fairer share of the national spoils or opportunities. So we have to look at this with a great deal of wisdom and patience. At the same time, there is no harm drawing some lessons from an unfortunate but a highly talented, beautifully located state called Lebanon.